Hello everybody and welcome to our depreciation practice exercise following the units of production method. So in this video we're going to be covering three different scenarios regarding the units of production method. First scenario will be when we have a full life for the asset. It's the expected life. The second scenario will be when the life that we expected, the actual life is shorter than what the expected life was. The third scenario will be when the actual life ends up being longer than what was expected. So for our data set here, we're going to say that Lenny's Widget Factory purchased a machine costing $257,500 with an expected life of 5 years and an estimated $20,000 salvage value. The machine was placed into service on January 1st. Now, in this data set, they also give us the information on units. Now, in the previous videos we've had where we covered straight line and double declining balance, we still had this data set, but we didn't really need the unit count until now. So units of production is where you need the detail of how many units were actually used or produced each period. So when this asset was purchased, it was expected to produce only 475,000 units. The actual production by year was as follows. And they give us the breakdown year 1 all the way through year 5. So we're going to prepare a depreciation schedule using the units of production method, assuming that we use the asset all the way up to the 5th year before disposing of it. And again, we're going to talk about the disposal, gains and losses and such in a different video altogether. These first videos in the series are just talking about the depreciation schedule. Now I've prepared a kind of an in-depth, if you will, depreciation schedule. And what I mean by in-depth is that it really includes more columns than you would normally need. But it's to serve a purpose to show you the different pieces of information we might have regarding a particular asset and its depreciation. So I'll go through that. We have 5 years, and the first thing we have is the depreciable cost. Now, we will actually need this information, but we don't necessarily need it for every single year because it's going to be the same amount per year. So it just depends on how you structure your formulas, if you want to put it in every year or not. I've added it as a column just to show what we're doing. But again, for the units of production method, well, and really for any method, the depreciable cost is the same every year. Depreciable cost is simply the cost of the asset or historical cost of the asset minus its salvage value. Doesn't matter what method you're using, it's going to be the historical cost minus its salvage value. So we can carry that down. That's every single year. For the straight line and units of production methods of depreciation, this is what you want to multiply by your rate or divide by your number of years if you're using straight line. So we will need this in just a bit. Now the beginning net book value. The idea here is that throughout our depreciation, we're going to take the historical cost of the asset and start depreciating, and then the ending net book value at the end of its life should equal the salvage value. So the net book value has nothing to do with salvage value. It has to do with just the cost. Now at the end, we should end up with the salvage value exactly. They should match, but net book value does not automatically subtract out the salvage value. So in other words, net book value at the beginning of the asset is going to be the historical cost. Now we have to do this calculation separately each year because every year is going to have its own depreciation. The units of production method requires that you calculate a depreciation rate per unit. It's unlike the straight line method that required a rate per year, or even the double declining balance method, which required a doubled rate by year. This one's going to be a different, it's going to be the same rate per unit, but it's going to be a different number of units each year. It could increase, could decrease. So what we need to do here is take the depreciable cost, the amount we actually want to depreciate, and divide it by the life in units. In this case, 475,000 total units. In this case, it looks like I have that formulated as a percentage. I need to change that to a currency, or just a number with 2 decimal places. It's actually 50 cents per unit. It's not 50%, it's 50 cents per unit. Now that's going to be the same under every year, unless something changes, unless the cost changes or the life in units change. But assuming everything stays the same, that rate's going to be the same. Now, the depreciation expense is where we're going to have to add actually a new piece in here. This will be a slightly different chart or schedule than what we had under the straight line, which is where we picked that from. Because here, we need the number of units produced. We have the depreciation rate. We need the number of units, and we could just populate this with the information given to us up in the data set. Now, again, we'll want to change that a little bit, formulate it. So now we have the number of units each year, and if we add that up, I want to make a point here. Of course, that's a number, not a dollar amount. So 475,000 units was exactly what we expected. So under this first scenario, it's exactly what we expected. Now the depreciation expense for any given year is going to be the rate multiplied by the number of units. So for year one, we're going to take $112,500. Now the accumulated depreciation is going to be the same as it was under other methods. For year one, it's just that first year's depreciation expense, but for later years, it's going to keep adding up to more and more. Now the ending net book value is just going to be the beginning net book value minus that year's depreciation expense. And then, of course, the ending net book value for 1 year becomes the beginning net book value for the next. So you can do a quick formula there to add that in. Again, depreciation expense is going to be the 50 cents per unit multiplied by 120,000 units. And now for the second year of accumulated depreciation, we take the balance from the year one plus this year's depreciation expense. Ending net book value is going to be last year's ending net book value minus depreciation expense for this year. Or you could just simply say beginning net book value minus depreciation expense takes you down to that same level. So again, now this year, in year three, this is the tricky part about units of production. If we have no units produced that period, we have no depreciation expense. There's just because we have the asset sitting there doesn't mean a thing. So nothing has changed here. Year 4 is going to be the same, 50 cents times 11,800. Not very much depreciation that year. And of course, we will take off the 5,900 of depreciation for that year. And they calculate the fifth year's depreciation, 50 cents per unit, multiplied by 117,200 units. And then we will subtract out that 58,600. So as I said earlier, if we do everything right and our life was what it was expected, our ending net book value should exactly equal our salvage value, which it did in this situation. So we're good to go. That only works though, or it only works automatically when our life is exactly what we expected. So what we're going to do here is take a look at the situation where it's not quite the same. And what I'm going to do, just to speed things up a little bit, I'm going to copy everything over there except that I'm going to remove the information that we need to change. In this case, what we're changing here is basically the last year's units produced. Now in year 5, everything else is going to be the same. We still have the same expected life, but that's estimated at the beginning of the life. We don't know for sure if it's going to come true or not, but that's our expectation. Year 1, 225,000. Year 2, 121,000. We're going down the line. Everything's the same except with year 5. We didn't produce quite as many units as we thought we were going to. Our total ends up being only 465,000 units throughout the life. But the problem is we didn't know that until the end. We had every reason to believe we were still going to have 475,000 units. So what I want to mention here, most of this is going to be the same. We're still going to start off with the beginning net book value of 257,500. We're still going to calculate things the same basic way for the first few years. So it's going to be 50 cents multiplied by 225,000. We're just going to do everything the same because for all we know, we're going to end up having the same 475,000 units. So I'm going to speed through some of this because we've already done this. 50 cents times 121,000. And that's, again, 0. Oops, that's supposed to be addition. So now we get to year 5. We're going to calculate it. And if you notice at the very end, we're done with this asset. This assumes we are disposing of this asset in the 5th year, but our ending net book value is just $25,000. Now, assuming we're going to be disposing of that when we make this calculation, what we would do is we would handle this way. We haven't quite hit the $20,000 ending net book value that we expected, but we're going to dispose of it anyways. So we would handle our gain or loss at that time. Now, if we were just retiring this and not quite disposing of it yet, if it was just sitting idle, then they may make a decision, assuming there's no reason to believe that the salvage value is any different than it was when it was estimated. If we still think it's $20,000, they may actually decide to depreciate the rest of that money, that additional $5,000, in year 5 to bring this exactly down to $20,000. But it just depends on the situation, depends on what's going on. If they're disposing of it right away, which in this case it looks like they are, they would just leave this transaction as is, and then they would dispose of it immediately, and we're going to talk about that disposal in another video. So this is the situation where our total actual life wasn't quite what we expected. Now, had they known about that earlier on, at the beginning of the year, a couple years ago, then they could have revised their depreciation rate going forward so that would actually be able to depreciate that remaining cost over a fewer number of remaining units, and you'd have a higher rate for those later years. We'll have another video covering that, changes in estimates of depreciation as well, for all 3 of these methods. But for this method, it's pretty straightforward. The information was not known until the very end, and at that point, it's too late to really change anything. So that takes us through the shorter life example. Now let's take a look when the life is longer. I'm going to copy most of this over because most of it's going to be the same, except that in the last year, and let me add the total column here. I have oops, try that again. So it's 465. That was that last example. Now, in this case, though, I'm going to delete these last two pieces out. In this case, it was expected to only be 475,000 units. All of our first 4 years are the same. But in this last year, we go to 135,200. So that would take us to 493,000 units, which is more than what we expected. So in this situation, if we were, and again, let's assume this was not known until the very end. If we were to do this calculation as it stands, we take 50 cents times 135,200. We get 67,600 with depreciation expense. We would add that to the original depreciation expense. We would subtract that from the ending net book value. And notice we're down below the salvage value at this point. Assuming we believe that the salvage value is still $20,000, then we need to make an adjustment in this last year to correct the depreciation expense so it only takes us down to $20,000. We can't go below the salvage value estimate. The salvage value estimate could change. That's a different scenario. If it hasn't changed, we have to leave it so that it exactly hits 20,000. In this case, the second to the last year ended up at 78,600. So to get at 20,000, we need to take 58,600. We just overwrite that year's depreciation expense, and it would exactly bring us down to 20,000. We don't really need to do anything with the number of units. We just need to overwrite the depreciation expense for that final year to bring us exactly to the estimated salvage value. So hopefully that helps to clarify what's going on in this type of problem for all three scenarios. I will talk to you in our future videos for the other depreciation methods, and I thank you for your time.